Hey everyone, welcome to Moving Matt. We do all things cameras with a dash of vlogs and a little bit of travel. And today I wanted to go over what is the 5 best mirrorless cameras right now in 2021. So a quick disclaimer before I get into everything, I have not personally used all the cameras on this list. I've used all the camera systems on this list except for one, but I do have friends that have these cameras, and as well as the nature of this channel where I'm covering the news most of the time and I'm having to go over the specs and look at all the reviews, and that's kind of how I'm evaluating these cameras and making this list. Of course, ideally I wish I could have used all these cameras, but this is still a small channel, so if I only talked about the cameras that I could use, I just would not have a channel right now. The last disclaimer is I did try to give a little bit of representation of multiple brands on this list, so it did maybe skew the results just a little bit, so it's kind of like grading on a curve. And obviously this is just my opinion. After this video, drop in the comment section below and give me your opinion. Without further ado, let's get into the list. At number 5, I have the Nikon Z6 Mark II, or the Nikon Z6 II. I'm not sure how they're naming this thing, but the reason it has my number 5 slot is because I think Nikon has came a long way with this camera. From what I've seen from the 6-month later reviews and not the early reviews where a lot of buggy software and some things were just not there yet, it looks like they've really improved this camera. Now, the autofocus still isn't quite there with Canon or Sony, but I definitely think it's usable at this point. What I do like about this camera is I like all the different color profiles you can get. It's quite a bit cheaper than the other cameras in this category, and even with the external RAW upgrade, it would come out to around $2,200, which I think is great, a great price for a mid-range camera, and they didn't push the price up like other brands are doing. I also think they've done a lot of great things with the Sony sensor, and it's really extended the life of this sensor. Adding the dual processors just shows how much you can get out of it. And also, this sensor has always had great dynamic range and low noise, and the way Nikon does their files and the way their menu system is set up, it gives you a lot of choice. At the same time, it is very fluid and has a great touchscreen on the back, and that is why it takes my number 5 slot. At number 4, I have the Fujifilm X-T4. And the reason I have the Fujifilm X-T4 here is because I really think it is the best APS-C offering that is on the market. And I know a lot of people love APS-C cameras. I personally go more with full frame, but I've used Fuji in the past. I think they are a great company. I think they really stand by their customers and try to give their customers what they want. I love the aesthetics and the feel of a Fujifilm camera. You just feels like it harkens back to a different time, and you really just feel, I don't know, some kind of legacy with these cameras. I also love that the X-T4 had 10-bit before pretty much anybody else had 10-bit. It has a 10-bit 4K 60, no crop besides, I mean, it's a crop camera, so I guess it has crop to a certain degree. One thing that kind of holds it back is the autofocus isn't quite there, but I do think it is usable. I also don't think that their IBIS has quite got up there with Canon and Nikon, so that holds the camera back slightly. But with the Fujifilm colors and also it being pretty much the only company, it looks like they're truly committed to the APS-C lineup. And also the Fujifilm not only has 4K 60, but it has 1080 240. So I really like this camera, and that's why it makes my number 4 slot. At number 3, and the top 3 of this list, I feel like jumps up in quality kind of insane, and I really think that any one of these top 3 are very high quality and great cameras. Really just depends on really what you're looking for and the price range you're wanting to work in. I feel like pretty much any of these cameras could change up in any different order, but I'm not going to cop out. I am going to put an order to this. And at number 3, I have the Sony a7S III. So the reason that the Sony a7S III takes my number 3 spot is it's absolutely insane when it comes to the video capabilities of this camera. I love that it practically doesn't overheat in 4K 60. I love the low light of this camera. I love the dynamic range of this camera. I love that you can dual record with this camera and it doesn't have record limits. And also, if there is any overheating, it has a really shallow cooldown time, and I think that is great. I also really like that it has a flip out screen. Finally, from Sony, they added a flip out screen to a very professional camera. I really like a whole lot of things about it, and it is a primarily video-centric camera, and that is why I did go with the Sony a7S III myself, because I primarily do video at this point. I also think it is a great photo camera with top-notch autofocus. It's very fast, it has great dynamic range in pictures as well, and it has great low light, being that it's only 12 megapixels. The one thing that is dropping it down for me is the fact that it's only 12 megapixels. I think that a lot of people, when they're looking at an all-around camera, and I'm making this as like a best of list, I think they're looking more for a hybrid, and I think some people will be turned off with the 12 megapixels. But if you're more video centric, maybe you're like a 70-30 person when it comes to video stills, I think that the 12 megapixels will be enough for you. And the Sony a7S III is very solid, and it gets my number 3 pick. So at number 2 of the best right now is the Canon R5. The Canon R5 is a 45 megapixel beast. It's a video camera beast. It has the 8K. It was the first camera in this category, in the mirrorless category, to offer 8K video. It also offers 8K RAW video, which is absolutely insane. 4K HQ looks super sharp. It's extremely fast. The autofocus works excellent, and it actually has 100% coverage instead of the 90% that the Sony a7S III has. And it has great wildlife autofocus, which I feel like they're actually beating Sony when it comes to the wildlife autofocus capabilities of this camera. I also think that Canon and Fujifilm are right at the top when it comes to color science, and I know that that's very subjective, but I think a lot of people would agree with me. I think you can get a great image right out of the camera. I love the Canon menus. I love their touchscreen. It's very high quality. It's bright enough. And also it's very functional. You can change pretty much everything on the touchscreen. And the way their menus work, it really works, and it's very user friendly. Some of the things knocking it from the top slot for me is that it did have that overheating issues. I still think that it is slightly an issue. It's not near as bad as it first was. I think some of the firmware updates have really helped it out. But still, from some people's experience that I know personally, they have had it overheat in a hot environment. And I often film in a very warm environment, a humid environment, and that's why I didn't really want to go with the R5 myself, and I went with the Sony a7S III. And also, I value more the dynamic range in the low light, and I thought that the 8K is a slight overkill. But another thing keeping it from the top is it does not have dual recording in video, and that's really a deal breaker for me. And it's also keeping those pesky record limits. I think that Canon has no excuse for not removing that, except for them trying to segment their market out from the cinema cameras. And I personally do not like that practice, and that's why it gets knocked just slightly. And it doesn't come in at number 1, which belongs to the A1. The A1 came onto the scene and made a really big splash. It's an extremely fast camera. It offers up to 30 frames per second, electronic shutter, and the way their electronic shutter works, it's pretty much, you don't need a mechanical shutter. Really, the way it works now, the speed of it, the way they're able to cut out the flickering lights and even use a flash with it now is super cool. I also think because of the speed, the rolling shutter is pretty much a non-issue at this point, and it really isn't going to be until a global shutter comes on the market that it's really going to surpass this in any real way. What's also super impressive about this camera is that it does have a 50 megapixel sensor, and that means it is capable of 8.6K, which is absolutely stupid when it comes to video. And also the file sizes and the codecs, even though they do not have 8K RAW, it does seem like it's much better to edit with, especially if you do not have one of the newer Macs. It's really hard to edit any of the files coming out like on the 8K range of the Canon R5. Another big advantage they have is their 4K doesn't overheat, and even though it's pixel binning, it doesn't really look like it at all. I don't know what magic they're doing with the software or if it's just the sensor, but it seems to be working for them. Another thing that is super impressive, considering that it has that 50 megapixel sensor, to see the great low light performance coming out of that camera is absolutely stunning. No, the low light isn't quite where the Sony a7S III is, but just the fact that the sensor size or the megapixel count on that sensor is pretty much, 4.5 times as much. I mean, that's pretty insane to be able to have that quality of low light performance on a camera that is 50 megapixels. And to top it all off, it has some of the best dynamic range of any camera out there. It's even better than the Sony a7S III, which seems kind of impossible, but somehow they're pulling it off. And Gerald & Dunn did a lot of these tests, so shout out to him for all of that. Now, the downside about this camera is it is super expensive. It's way more expensive than any of the other cameras on this list. It's $1,600 more than the Canon R5, And I think it is questionable to say that it's $1,600 more impressive. I think Canon is really close with the R5 in a lot of ways. And just the fact that they have the R5 at $3,900 is pretty great. And it makes me very excited to see what the future of Canon's going to be when they release the R3 and then the R1 in the future, to see where their flagships are going if their $3,900 camera performs the way it does. So there are some downsides, but it still takes that #1 spot. It's an excellent camera. I think that if you can afford it and you're a sports action photographer, I mean, it's the best of the best. It's what's out there. It makes my #1 pick. But those are just my opinions. What are your thoughts? Drop in the comment section below and let me know. What is your list? Do you agree with my list? Do you think I'm way off? I mean, just let me know below. I'm sure this is gonna be kind of a controversial video. I'm expecting some likes and dislikes, but if you've liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And until next time, peace.